Hey, sister.
Hey, sister.
Join me, Courtney Lewis,
And me, Carly Ferguson,
in our conversational podcast about everyday situations.
You can count on us to tell it to you straight with our own sisterly spin.
Consider this a phone call with your own Southern sisters as we discuss with you personal accountability, healthy relationships, managing responsibilities, and contributing to society.
Each episode will consist of straight talk and a call to action.
Your sisters are calling.
Thanks for answering.
Welcome to Hey Sister. This is episode 7, Mama Called the Doctor.
Social media is a lot of things and gets a pretty bad rap for all the discord it causes. But I have found it has been a blessing in my life to keep the connection with friends that I might not have otherwise been able to keep in touch with. I met Chelsea around 10 years ago at a small party of friends, and I'm so grateful that I've been able to continue to see her life blossom and unfold as a fly on her Facebook wall of sorts. To be privy to the pictures of the happy moments, marriage, having 2 cute boys and dogs. It was hard to see when she posted about her daughter Reagan's unexpected birth, and since then, I've followed her and Reagan's story closely as she kept a crowd of us praying and waiting for the next appointment or the next procedure for this absolutely adorable little girl. My son Jet had 2 stints in the hospital, once after he was born when he had a 10-day stay for antibiotics to be administered intravenously, and again at 1 month when he got RSV and was in the PICU for 4 days. As those surreal moments unfolded, I was grateful to have the echoes of Chelsea's posts coming to my mind as I had to make decisions for my own baby. Her experiences gave me a perspective shift I wouldn't have had. Her vulnerability and the lessons about how she was handling the health roller coaster, while also sharing cute videos of little Reagan cooing, bolstering me up during my short time in the hospital. We pray no one have to go through hard things, but it helps immensely to consider how we would respond to such things and how we can help others we know who are in the hospital. Today, we are so happy to have Chelsea with us to sprinkle some of the confidence she instilled in me with all of you sisters. That said, Chelsea, welcome to Hey Sister.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. And I wish I would have known the introduction was going to make me cry. That was really sweet.
We are just so happy to have you here. And for all of our sisters, would you share Reagan's story and how she's doing today?
Absolutely. My sweet little daughter was born at 23 weeks and 4 days gestation. So she was born 17 weeks early. They say that the viable age of a baby is 24 weeks. So she hadn't even made it to that. I ended up having HELLP syndrome, which a lot of people aren't too familiar with, but it's basically preeclampsia on steroids. So my blood pressure was like 240 something over 160 something. And I remember going into the hospital, not realizing what was going on. I just knew that I had upper abdominal pain. And I went in thinking, oh, I just want some crazy good medicine, like to knock me out, whatever, just make me feel better. So they sent me into the labor triage and they were taking my vitals and everything. And I remember sitting there and I could feel the chemistry in my body changing, which sounds really crazy. I don't know any other way to explain it, but I knew that I was going to have a seizure or a stroke or something. So I just started praying like, Heavenly Father, I need something to happen. I need you to protect me right now. I know something bad is going to happen. As I was praying, they came in. They're like, we have to rush you back to emergency surgery. You're going to have your baby right now. And at that moment, I didn't really realize what it meant to have a baby at 23 weeks. I was like, fine, whatever it takes to get this pain to stop. Just take me. So as they were rolling me back, it kind of clicked how bad it was. I actively tuned out everything going on around me. I wasn't listening to the doctors anymore. I wasn't listening to the nurses. I didn't want to listen after they cut Reagan out of my stomach because I was afraid to get attached. She wasn't breathing. So the neonatologists resuscitated her and they rushed her up to the NICU. She was born 1 pound, 1 ounce and only had a 20% chance of living. But with each passing week, she defied all odds and she was in really great care. They did everything that they knew how to do for these tiny miracle babies. And she overcame pneumonia within the first month of her life. She overcame countless blood transfusions. She's still currently going through ROP, which is an eye issue where the blood vessels don't quite cover the back of the retina how it's supposed to. She had lung disease, chronic lung disease, you name it, she had it, but she is somehow thriving and overcoming everything put in her way. She's truly the biggest little miracle that we've ever seen.
She is. Thank you so much for sharing that. I know as I was just reading those glimpses into it, she's such a fighter, and how remarkable. My heart goes out to you because you were really just thrown into that, and then learning all of these terms that just boggle my mind. Like the litany of all these different procedures or the ins and outs of them. You've been through it. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, of course.
You were rushed into this, and you have 2 other boys, right? Did they have any issues going into the hospital or anything like that?
That was probably one of the hardest things because we were actually on vacation when all of this happened. We were down in San Antonio, so 4.5 hours from home. Somehow, miraculously, we ended up at the only level 4 NICU within a 2-hour radius of where we were. There were closer hospitals that we could have gone to, but we were led to that specific hospital. And I don't know how else to say it, but the Spirit led us there. So going into the hospital, I didn't realize that I was going to be there for 3 weeks because I was really sick. So even after having Reagan, I couldn't leave the hospital. I went into the hospital in the middle of the night. My boys went to sleep. I was there. When they woke up, I wasn't there. So I was just like randomly gone for 3 weeks. They had a really hard time with it. And I had a hard time not seeing them. And they didn't understand why mommy was in the hospital. My boys weren't allowed to come in because of Miss Rona going on. So I couldn't see any of my family for 3 weeks. So it was really difficult being away from home. Why is mommy not coming home? And so we did our best to FaceTime every day. I got them presents from the hospital. So they thought that their little sister was thinking of them and their mommy was thinking of them, because I didn't want them to think, oh, our baby sister's here now and she took mommy away. So I tried to bridge that gap and really make them feel included when they weren't allowed into the hospital.
It sounds like you had a lot of balancing to do between your boys at home or on vacation, your daughter, and there was a ton of decisions to make. So when you've got all these decisions to make, were there times where you doubted yourself in your decision-making abilities?
Absolutely. In every aspect. On top of the decision-making, I also felt like I had failed my family because it was my body that did this. So not only was I questioning if going down to San Antonio at that specific time was the right thing for our family, because I kind of pushed it. I was like, this is the weekend. We're going to go see my sister. It's her birthday. And so I made it happen. And here we are. All of this is unfolding as we're on vacation because I pushed it. I had that built on top of my body failing me to the point where I had to give birth to my daughter. Now she's enduring this huge trial. And then my decision-making skills with talking to the doctors, because I'm nowhere near an expert in their specific field. And so going up against that, but still trying to advocate for my daughter is a really difficult position to be in. I found resources. I found this NICU book that had all the terms in there because I want to know exactly what they were talking about. That way, they didn't have to always put it in layman's terms for me, because they tried to do that and be like, oh, well, are you talking about this? And they'd be like, oh, yeah, that is exactly what we're talking about. So let's continue on with the conversation since you seem to understand what it is that we're dealing with. So I think finding resources, whether it's people who have been through the situation, literature, whatever, it definitely helps not question as much of your decision-making skills when you're in the hospital.
Because as a mom, we don't have time to doubt ourselves when the crucial moments happen. Like, you don't have that luxury. You have to make decisions quickly. So it's hard though when you're doubting yourself. And I'm glad to hear you found confidence, whether it's through resources like a NICU book. That sounds like a really awesome resource. And was there anything else you did to boost your own confidence aside from getting resources like that during this time?
Other than faking it till I made it, I would say I prayed to know what to do. And every day I prayed for every single medical staff that was working with her, that they would be led by the Spirit to know exactly what to do specifically for her, not based on any other babies. I think not only praying for my strength and Reagan's strength, but also praying for the people that are deciding what the next step is for her is a really important thing. And then finding comfort through the Spirit. I
remember reading of an instance when you went to visit her and she seemed hungry and you didn't know if you could feed her or not, but you chose to feed her. And then you found out that was okay later. But when I was in the hospital and I was thinking about that, I was like, you go, mama, because there is this sense that you lose a little bit of autonomy of being the mom and being the one taking care of them. But there's so much trust that you have in this team. Really, it is a team of nurses and physicians that are working together. And you feel like part of that team. My role here is the mom. And it's empowering in one way, but also really hard because you're kind of the one constant there going between the different hospitals like you had and different nurses coming in and out. I remember listening to when they would do the shift changes and be like, oh, you missed this. Yes. I'm sure you were like, I know exactly how to handle this.
Yeah.
Because you're so closely ingrained into it. So that was something that really impressed me, that you had that to do something in that situation. And when you went home,
Thank you.
how was that transitioning from the hospital to going home?
So the first time coming home, Reagan was in the NICU for 130 days. And by the time she got out, obviously I was excited for her to be home, but I was also extremely nervous because at that point I was like, this is all on my own now. Like, it's just me and my husband trying to figure this out. We don't have the help of the doctors and the nurses. I was terrified, honestly, even though we had like the monitors, she was still on the oxygen. Yeah. I was excited and really nervous all at the same time. I had lots of emotions.
Yeah. When you went back in, was there anything that you brought with you to bring you more comfort, like from home to the hospital when she went back in for RSV and rhinovirus and all those things?
Yeah, the trifecta. So when we went back in to the hospital, I did not realize that she was going to be admitted. I thought we were going to go in, they were going to section her out because our firstborn also had RSV at about 3 months old, and they didn't admit us. They just did what they did, and then he was good to go, and we just stayed on top of it. But with her, they rushed her right back, and they're like, she's great. They started trying to get IVs in both of her hands. And so it like put me right back into that NICU mode. So after they admitted her, I brought a diffuser with oils. I brought 2 different mattress pads so that I could get at least an okay night's sleep while I was there. Brought lots of blankets and pillows. I did bring toys for her. I brought things to decorate her crib just so she had things to look at. Did what I could to make it feel a little homey.
That's a beautiful thought, because so often the hospital isn't quite like a hotel. It's close, no, but it's nice to think that you can personalize it a little bit. And this is going to air over Christmas. So I think this is a good reminder that if you're in the hospital and listening to this episode this week, do the best you can to make your room feel a little like home, whether it's diffusing an essential oil that might smell like peppermint or wintergreen or whatever, to just make it smell a little bit better. I don't think you're supposed to burn candles in the hospital, so maybe don't do that. But yeah, an essential oil diffuser would be good. And what a cute idea to decorate her crib. That's so special.
Really keeping that spirit high while you're in the hospital is really important. Did you make any friends with the nurses while you were there?
I feel like I make friends out of everybody that I meet. I just like to talk, and everybody loves Reagan. So maybe they're my friends because Reagan is so cute. I don't know, but I'll take it. I feel like definitely while she was in the NICU, we're going to have lifelong friends because they are literally the people that saved her life. And when we transferred her up to Fort Worth, they even got her this little onesie that looked like a little package on it that said, from North Central Baptist to Cook's Children, handle with care, because they told us that that's how they let the new staff know, this is our baby. We love her. Take good care of her. And I will hold a special place in my heart for the nurses and doctors that were with her in the NICU. As for going back into the hospital, I don't see me following up with any of those people, but I did make friends with them and they were great. So hopefully we don't see them anytime soon again, but if we do, it'll be great.
Well, I just remember at the beginning, I was like upset about what was going on. And so I was looking inward, and there was this moment where I was like, you know what? I'm going to strike up a conversation with my nurse. And it ended up being so beneficial to me. And I didn't realize it was going to be like that. But once I remembered that she's a person and that I want to learn from her and talk to her as well, instead of just being like tunnel vision on this moment right now, talking about those comforts that we bring in, sometimes just allowing ourselves to talk and loosen up a little bit to the people around us that are coming in. And instead of it just being business as usual, thinking and talking to them, that helped me out.
I don't know if the hospital that y'all were at had the volunteers would come in and hold the babies and the kids and stuff. No. Okay. So at Cook's, they have these volunteers that come in.
I have to say, though, my experience is so far like you can say a sprained ankle and a broken leg are different things, and that you should like stay off either of them.
Yeah.
But they're different, you know? It was humbling for me, but I know it was not near the amount of load that you had going on. So I feel for your situation and being removed from your family.
Any hospital stay is hard. It doesn't matter if it's 4 days or 130 days. Like, it's still hard being there. And so I am not one to like compare and be like, oh, well, my daughter was in there a lot longer than yours, so I had a tougher time. No, it's tough on everybody. It doesn't matter, especially when you have other kids. Like 10 days, 100 days, it seems really long to them. We were lucky the second time around. I found out toward the end of our stay that they had these volunteer people who are coming in. And some old man came in and was like, would you like to get a coffee or something or go grab some food? I'll just sit here and hold your baby for you. And I was like, fantastic. Yes, I would love to take some time to myself because I felt like I had to stay in the room with her. I would go down to the cafeteria and eat and go right back up. But just to go like walk around and just take time to breathe to get out of that setting, I think is a really big deal. So for any parent who's in the hospital with their child, I would suggest go get some fresh air, go gain a different perspective, just get out of the room. It'll help a little bit.
It's interesting you say that, Chelsea. I remember, Carly, when you were in the hospital, and obviously with current restrictions, there can't be a lot of visitors. So that's one good thing about what you're saying, Chelsea, is having a volunteer come in, because volunteers have been vetted and they are regularly testing them right now to make sure that it's safe for everyone involved. Because you can't just have extended family coming because you get one visitor right now. And when Carly told me that at her hospital that she was at, that there was what was the name for the clergy, Carly? There was a name for the person that was there, but he came in and wanted to pray with you. And you were excited to have a visitor, right?
Yeah, the chaplain came in and I had already read on the wall they'd had what his role was, and it was just to talk, and if you needed someone to pray with, that he was there for you. And we had actually a beautiful opportunity to have someone we knew be there and give a blessing to our baby while we were there, which was wonderful. And then he came in soon after that, I believe. And I was just so open to, yes, let's talk and let's pray. And this is so good that this is offered, because being in that situation without help or just another person, I could not imagine. There's so much that you realize you need in emotional assistance when you are in the hospital with your baby. They're going through so much and you're feeling each one of those pokes and pricks. It feels like it's going on you too. And it's really hard to see all those IVs. I just have so much more respect for those that have to put IVs into little babies. That is not an easy job. And just in those small things that we consider small before, and then you see it happening and you're grateful for their training in what they do. But we need that help too during that time, because we need to get out. We need to take that breath of fresh air. And for me, when I was in the hospital, I was able to call my husband some because he was taking care of the kids. And getting those Facebook updates from you on your daughter was also just good to read, just to feel like there was somebody going through something similar. And we have this episode titled Mama Called the Doctor. And we call the doctor, but who else do we call? Who did you call in those times?
I would say that I relied very heavily on my husband and my sister. My sister lives down in San Antonio, so she was my rock during the week when my husband was back home working. My boys were gone. And she had just a really good perspective on everything. When I thought that my world was crashing, she helped me realize and see the bigger picture. No matter what would happen to my daughter, she's the one that pointed out, do you see how many people she is bringing to God right now? Do you see how many people are praying on her behalf? Like, how many of these people do you think Heavenly Father hasn't heard from in a long time? And I just stopped in my tracks and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to try not to cry. But just the fact that even at a month old, she was a little missionary bringing people to God. And it just put a whole new perspective on it for me, that she had a purpose and she was doing her purpose when I just felt so guilty for bringing her into this world too early. So other than my husband and my sister, obviously relying on Heavenly Father, I went to him in prayer so often. I feel like I was in prayer more often than I wasn't throughout the day. Just praying to him, trying to peel back the layers of the trauma that I was going through and still am trying to work through, obviously. Like I break down and cry more often than I'd like to admit. Also, just relying on people who have been through this. There are support groups on Facebook, and then becoming friends with other parents in the NICU and just saying like, how's your baby doing? What's going on with y'all? Oh, here's what's going on with me. Not necessarily compare, just to be a support system for somebody who's going through the same thing is a really big help.
Those support systems are so important. As somebody who's not been in the hospital for an extended stay for a child other than for birth, I've just been really touched by the stories that I've heard from Carly's perspective recently, from yours, even before this podcast, when Carly was telling me when she was in the hospital about your situation. And now as I continue to learn more about different people's situation, I just saw on Facebook today, 2 of my friends have babies who are going into the hospital. Hospitals are at capacity right now. And these kids are in the hospital with things I've never heard of. These are unprecedented times. So I love that perspective that you've got, Chelsea, that we can be there as a support system for each other. And also that everybody has a role to play. Carly, you mentioned the team of healthcare workers, that you're part of that team as a mom, and that your daughter, Reagan, or Carly, when your son was in the hospital, he had a role to play in that too, whether it's that their job is to act as the means or the motivation to get somebody on their knees pleading to God. Chelsea, we talked about you might have doubted your own decision-making and you found confidence there. I'm guessing that you might have had some doubts and decisions that were being suggested by healthcare workers. Did you doubt those decisions? And if so, how did you find confidence in the decision that you came to with them as your team?
I can actually think of a couple specific instances where this happened. So before we transferred her, the doctors were trying to get her off this special formula and move her to regular formula. In my family, we have a lot of allergies. And so that's what I would tell them. My family doesn't do well with this, and this. We really need to be careful when introducing this formula to her. She didn't do well with it. And I was really afraid of neck, which is where the lining of the bowels perforate and babies can really easily die. And that was like my number one fear while being in the NICU. And so I was very adamant, don't want her having this. I don't want her having this. Can we please just switch her back to this other formula, which was actually made from a mother's breast milk. And so that was the best for them. But it's really expensive. So they kept saying, oh, it's really expensive. They really want her off of it by X amount of weeks. I was like, let's keep giving it to her until they really take it away from us. And I just kept pushing till finally they agreed to start giving it to her again. So that wasn't really like a bad decision that they were making or something that I didn't like fully agree with, but that was me advocating for her to get her the best decision for her. And then once we transferred her up to Fort Worth, again with feeding, we were trying to figure out what was the best option for her because she was aspirating. I wasn't allowed to breastfeed her. She had to have thickener. And so going through that process and telling them what my concerns were and asking what all of our possible options were, just knowing what was laid out in front of me. That way I could trust their decision-making process just as much as I trusted mine. Because I feel like you need to know what all of your options are before you can make a decision, especially when it comes to your child.
That is so important. And I remember sometimes having an idea that I would want to suggest. So I'd seen several people try to administer an IV, and the times that it was most successful, they had done a couple of things to help prepare the area. And we had another instance where they needed to put in another IV, and they called in the anesthesiologist, the bigwigs, right, of the hospital. And he came in and I was watching them as they were starting to do it, and they failed twice. And at that point, I started recommending what might help to prep the area with the heating pack, a light, something like that. And the anesthesiologist, he was pretty young, and he was like, thank you so much for advocating for your son. He was so kind about it. He actually went on for a little bit and was kind of a moment that I wasn't expecting. I was like, oh, no, that's okay. Like, we can move on now. I'm glad you're glad that I'm advocating. But I would have done it regardless. But it was sweet that he felt that way. And then when he left, the nurse, he was a traveling nurse. And so he was like, that's amazing. He responded that way because they don't have to accept what you tell them. And so he was impressed by his behavior with that. When you were speaking with the professionals, was there a way that you would present your recommendation or something? Or is there some way that you kind of followed whether or not to tell them or not?
So I think as long as you say whatever you want to say with respect and not in a way like undermining them, I think that they will react lovingly as long as you present it lovingly, if that makes sense.
Makes perfect sense. And that's just a good communication skill in life in general, but extremely true in the healthcare setting.
Don't be afraid to advocate for your kids or yourself if you're the one that's in the hospital, because you have that mother's intuition. You know your child better than the healthcare providers. I think as you're talking to the doctors and the nurses, don't be afraid to say something, because you don't know whether it's just like an idea that you have or if it is the spirit telling you that something else needs to be done. And so there's no harm in asking. There's no harm in asking. They'll either say yes or they'll say no.
Amen. So true. So if someone were in the same situation, what would you recommend doing for them to ease their load just a bit more?
I would say if they have other kids, offering to help watch them so that the parents don't feel so torn between being in the hospital with their child and being at home with their other children. That's a really hard place to be in. And I would also say helping out with meals. That was a big help, because when I was in the hospital all day, I'll reference this last time that I was there. So I stayed in the hospital with Reagan. I didn't go home. I spent the night there. So people providing meals for my family, because heaven knows my husband isn't going to cook at night. He could order pizza every day of the week or make cereal. But it was really nice to have people start a meal train and offer to drop food off for them. Honestly, the dads need some love too. I would say supporting them that way. They're going through this just as much as the mom is. So don't forget about the husbands.
Chelsea, is there anything else you would add that helped boost your confidence or that helped get you through your times in the hospital?
Yes, I would say rely on social media to get the word out there. If you're wanting people to know what you're going through, if you're wanting prayer requests, there are so many prayer warriors out there that are more than happy to be praying for your child.
I would totally agree, because I had seen you on social media posting these things and felt connection to you through those, even though we haven't talked in a long time. I'd see these things and my heart went out to you through it. And so when I found myself in the hospital and they were rushing us from one hospital to the PICU of another, I couldn't get a hold of my husband. He was asleep. It was the middle of the night. And at least he was able to sleep. That's all I could think. I was like, oh, he's sleeping. He's got to be up with the boys the next day. So that's probably good. But I still needed connection. I needed to reach out. And so I was able to do that through social media and a blast of a post. It was just a story at the time. And that was really helpful for me, because I tend to be more private in things. And it's just a taller wall for me to get over to post something. And it was really good. And I really felt the prayers. I haven't felt that way in a long time, where there was just this rush of goodness inside. I mean, you could just feel help. Even if things weren't going the way you wanted them to, you felt comforted somehow through it all.
One thing that I really loved while Reagan was in the NICU was that it didn't matter what religion or denomination people were. There were people praying, and honestly, I didn't care. If somebody who was Muslim wanted to pray for my daughter or pray with me over her, I would gladly accept it, because God hears all the prayers. And I know that he's going to answer all of these prayers. The fact that we had people literally praying for her all over the world because people kept sharing her story, didn't matter what religion, where they were from, just the fact that all of these people were opening heaven's gates, listening to us all pray. It was an amazing thing to be on the receiving end of something. I've never experienced that before.
It really ignites that spiritual fervor of let's do it, and just thinking of somebody outside of yourself in those moments. It's easier to pray hard for somebody else than it sometimes even is for you. It's a really wonderful thing that we can do that and feel that support from strangers, from friends, from whomever. It's a beautiful opportunity, even if it is exhausting as you're going through it.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure both of you experienced this of having people, when you would update social media, yes, you're so grateful for the prayers. And there's probably a few people that message you, you're like, okay, I don't really have time to get back to every message individually. But Carly, I remember you telling me sweet people reach out to you and be like, I will be there if you need me. And you're like, you live 3 hours away. And you're like an old teacher that I had.
Yeah.
It's so sweet.
Well, and I thought, oh, she thinks I'm still like right there down the street from her. And so I said, oh, we're actually now in Waco. And she's like, I'd still come. You saintly woman. Seriously, that is so kind and genuine.
People are so good. And while I don't have a hospital story to contribute here, I will say when you're talking about prayers of people, it just reminded me of a funny little story. When my husband and I were going through infertility years ago, I was working at this cute little shop in Carlsbad, New Mexico. I remember I'd gotten a call that we'd gone through IVF and it didn't work. And I was really sad about it one day at work. And this sweet lady, she said to me, well, let's pray. And so I bowed my head. And then she came up to me and she was on a snack break and she'd just eaten like a whole bag of Cheetos. And so she had the most the potent Cheeto breath you've ever smelled. And she put her hands on my stomach and she gave me a blessing. And she blessed me to have a womb that was open. And it was the sweetest thing I'd ever experienced, but also kind of stinky, because I'm like smelling her
fingers.
Yeah, it was so sweet. Anyway, people are so good in this world. And it really is heartwarming. And Chelsea, I'm sure you felt so much power coming your way from the prayer warriors.
Oh, yeah. Just to remember that social media can be a force for good. I love that because you see so much negativity. And so just to be on the receiving end of something like that due to social media, like what a huge blessing for people who are struggling to be able just to reach out, write a post and say, hey, this is what we're going through and I need you. And people just show up.
Yeah. And it's a symbiotic thing too, because you sharing that, even if it's hard to share, like for someone else reading it, like we said before, creates that need for them to pray, to reach outside themselves. They get a glimpse into something they're not currently having to maybe deal with, and it gives them perspective and maybe gratitude for what they're dealing with at that moment. It's a different society that we live in than in ages past, where there was like a village raised the children together. And now we like have this kind of village of social media. If you're using it the right ways, it can really empower you, always with balance and having interaction with people in person as well. But like those moments, I would read about how you were handling it and like what you were thinking about as the kids were running around with the cords from your daughter, and imagining that for me, because I have 2 boys of my own too. And so I was thinking, wow, like we don't have cords. So I should think about it in this way now. And the perspective change just really helps too. So it is symbiotic. It's a gift to be able to read those things and then be able to respond with a prayer or something small.
And Chelsea, way to go on making your posts public too, because it's one thing to share something for your immediate friends to see online, but you must have made your posts public. And the reason I know that is because Carly, yes, would tell me on the phone things she learned from Chelsea. I would hear you on a first name basis from Carly. And so I felt like I got to understand a little bit of your story then, but I also learned more of your story because my cousin Matt would share your posts that you'd made public, which I thought was so sweet, because I would be praying for you before I even knew you were connected to Carly. Like I heard about you publicly from a cousin. So it's kind of neat. Kudos to you for being vulnerable. That's a hard thing.
And that's exactly what it is, being vulnerable to share the hardest challenges that you're going through. And I'm not one to just throw things out there on social media, because I keep things that are near and dear to my heart close to my heart.
Well, because people might criticize you. You put it out there and people may be like, oh, you should have done this. And that's where it gets scary. Yes, you get the prayers. Yes, you get kind people, but you might also get a criticism or two here and there. So it does come with a price.
I know for us in our stays, we had such an outpouring of love from family and my sisters close by, my sisters-in-law, and from others too, just reaching out. It was so helpful. And going back to what Courtney was saying about what's going on with the hospitals right now, it just seems like more people are being admitted, more things are happening health-wise. How grateful are we for this healthcare system that we can go to for this expert help and to help us through those times, but also for these support systems that we have with our sisters and with those just around us that we come in contact with, that we open up to and share. I know sharing really is caring. And then receiving that care back really helps to build us up through really hard times, because it's not easy to be pulled in so many different directions while you're being held in one place. And so I really appreciate all that you've shared and how authentic you are with all of it. And it's really relatable and inspiring for me, for all those that have listened to you. And I think for everyone, even if you don't have that need now, and hopefully we don't want this to happen for anyone, but if it should, try to prepare yourself even before then as much as possible, not in the anxious ways of imagining what ifs, catastrophizing things.
Yeah.
Or don't go out and buy that NICU terminology book so you have it on hand ready to go.
Yeah, well, I think listening to other people's stories and their experiences helps, but then also having one takeaway from that. What's something that I can do? We have some calls to action this week. We have two. The first goes back to your sweet daughter, Reagan, and what you shared about her eyes and the ROP, how we can pray for her, for there to be growth in that area behind the retina. So if we could all pray for her, I know that strength and power of prayer will be felt by your family. And our second call to action, Courtney, do you want to share that?
I sure would love to. So as moms, we often have to list an emergency contact on our kids' intake forms for preschool, school, sports they're playing in, for their pediatrician, whatever entity, wherever your kid's going, you often have to fill out this emergency contact form. And many times we just list a distant relative who honestly may not actually be close enough to help in times of a true emergency. So our call to action today is to really consider who in, say, a 15-minute radius you would call on to help in an emergency, and be vulnerable enough to let them know that they are your person. Because I think it's important that we open up and let other people know that, hey, just so you know, in times of an emergency, you're the person I would count on. Make sure also, if you're married, that your spouse knows who that person is, because if, say, you go to the hospital and some emergency happens, you want your husband to know who to reach out to. Those are our call to actions this week. And Chelsea, we have just really enjoyed having you with us. I've enjoyed getting to know you better. I know Carly's known you for a while, but it's been a huge pleasure for me to get to know you. And we know that the sisterhood is just going to fall in love with you. So can you share with us where our sisters can find you?
Yes. And more importantly, Reagan.
Yes.
So my Instagram handle is Chelsea with Purpose. And that's where we do all of her updates. If you look for the hashtag Reagan and Strong, you'll find all of our posts about her and her journey.
Wonderful. I'll look forward to following that and keeping up. I know Carly's already been, so I'm excited as well. And don't forget, sisters, when you're online, make sure you're following us at Hey Sister Podcast on our socials. Don't forget to look out for the roll call post this week, where we will check in with you to see how you've been doing on these call to actions, which, as a reminder, number 1 is to pray for Reagan that the blood vessels behind her eye will continue to grow. And part 2, decide who your emergency contact person is within a 10 to 15 minute radius that you would actually call on in case of an emergency, and let them know who they are. Make sure you tune in next week for part 2 of this episode, and the doctor said. You've heard of Mama called the doctor and the doctor said. So maybe we're the monkeys leading this, this podcast here. And the doctor said is coming at you next week with the perspective of a healthcare professional in today's world, with some tips and tricks on navigating the healthcare system. That is a wrap for today.
Thank you so much, Chelsea.
Thank you. Sorry that I cried.
It was beautiful.
I was like verging on tears like the whole time. because I went right into that and you were like, okay,
It's not time,
we're
Carly.
going.
We're going to wrap this up. Okay, got it.
That's what I'm here for.
I know.
Stay on the edge of your seats, people.
Squirrel.